Hello everyone and welcome to a brand new video. Last time I ranked every single boss in Dark Souls 3 from D tier to S tier. In today's video I will be talking about all 7 S tier bosses and ranking them 1 through 7. Enjoy the video. So this video has been a long time coming. I was a bit sick, so that's why it took me so long to make it, because I wanted for my voice to come back. But here we are. This was the tier list that I made for every single boss in Dark Souls 3. And now, today, we are going to be ranking all the S rank bosses, going in the order from 7th to 1st place. In 7th place, I have Champion Gundyr. Now in my previous video, I said Champion Gundyr is an absolutely perfect boss, and I really like him. That is true, that still stays true. The thing about Champion Gundyr though, is that he's not nearly as interesting as the rest of these other bosses. I still think he's a perfect boss fight. He's definitely incredible. The parrying, just his moveset in general, it flows very nicely. But although he's perfect, he's not hard. Although I think he's a really good boss, he's not as hard as these other ones, and he just doesn't have the thing that makes him so special. I really like how they brought back Iudex Gundyr to kind of rematch him at his full power. And this boss fight is very fun always, because if you can't parry, you could still fight the boss normally, and that's really fun. That's what I did on my first playthrough. But it's also really fun to try to parry him even if you mess up. At the end of the day, I still think Champion Gundyr is an incredible fight, but out of the rest of these S tier bosses, yeah, he ain't making it. At number 6, I have a boss with one of the best concepts, Abyss Watchers. What makes the Abyss Watchers so special is the first phase is you fight one, then another one comes along and they're kind of ganging up on you. Another one comes along, they're kind of ganging up on you. And then a third one comes along and you think he's going to gang up on you, but he ends up helping you as long as you don't attack him. It really shows the idea that they're being controlled by the Abyss and it's kind of going haywire. And then once you defeat them all in the first phase, then you move on to the second phase where all their power kind of goes to one person. Then he stands up in one of the coolest cutscenes, his sword is on fire, and then you guys gotta duke it out. It's just incredible. Now the Abyss Watchers can be parried and also backstabbed, which makes the fight significantly easier. I found it way harder to backstab the Abyss Watchers in phase 2. Now the moveset of this boss is so acrobatic and it's so interesting. Especially if he drags his sword on the ground or just swings it in general, there's a trail of flames. Their armor set is also really cool. Like everything about this boss, I think encapsulates the word cool. Now we get to my top 5 favorite bosses in Dark Souls 3. I've got to give it to Pontiff Sulyvahn. He uses a flame greatsword, a flame ultra greatsword, and a magic greatsword in the other hand, and it looks really cool. And then he charges at you, and his moveset flows very nicely. He feels like one of those bosses in this game that are kind of like a skill check. Like, if you can't beat Pontiff Sulyvahn, well, obviously you're going to be stuck because you can't beat Aldrich then. But you need to be able to beat him, and he's completely fair. You know, you're probably not just going to win because you got lucky. He does have, I feel like, a few delayed attacks. You know, some stuff that you can't expect until you get used to it and actually get skilled at the fight. When he activates his second phase, he kind of has a little explosion of darkness or whatever, and he gains a few new attacks. One of them being that he can summon kind of a doppelganger clone of himself, and then they both fight you. Now what I didn't know until very recently is that apparently his clone, whenever his clone attacks, Pontiff will do the exact same attack as him right after him. I think that's just incredible, because now you know what Pontiff's going to do. You can kind of attack the opening, which makes it fair, but for new players who haven't noticed that, they kind of feel like it's unfair, even though it completely is fair. It took me like 12 attempts on my first time, and that was probably one of the most attempts for any of the bosses in this game. Pontiff is one of the bosses that can be parried, and it definitely helps to start off the fight. You can just immediately parry him, which is what I usually do. But I find it hard to parry him after the initial parry, and you can still do it, but it makes it a lot more interesting. It adds a little bit more risk for such a high reward. For me at least. And overall, this is just a completely really solid boss fight. I love it. At number 4, I got Dark Eater Midir. Now Dark Eater Midir is a giant dragon boss, and I love dragons, so his design is really cool to me, and the way that he uses fire and dark, that's very interesting. Also, Dark Eater Madeir resists a lot of different types of damage. With his massive health bar, there is no reason he should be resisting fire, magic, and dark. Luckily, he is very weak to lightning. Now, on my first playthrough, I used the Ring Knight Straight Sword on him. I think it was +5, so maxed out. And I was not really attacking his head, so I did way less damage. And I heard that that's supposed to make the fight unbearable and not fun at all. That fight was still so much fun, even though I technically did it wrong. It was really fun because he had such a big health bar and it was a huge challenge for me. Now, whenever I go through this fight anymore, I always hit his head, and I fight him completely differently than I did the first time. I think both ways of fighting him are really good. They're pretty fun. I mean, you're at a higher risk of getting hit when you go after his head, but you do way more damage. And then when he transitions into a second phase and he just does a little explosion, that was super cool for me. Then he summons the little humanity sprites for one of his attacks, which can be annoying, but I really like the idea of it. And just using the combination, like I said, of fire and dark and a big dragon makes him so cool. Not to mention the boss weapons you can get from him. The Frayed Blade is one of my favorite weapons in this entire game. It's just so cool. And then the spell that you can get with this Soul, Old Moonlight, is also just a really cool spell. Dark Eater Madeir is definitely one of those bosses that has haters for no reason. I feel like Dark Eater Madeir, if you take enough time, which it definitely does take time, you take enough time to get used to the moveset, becomes one of the best bosses. Now we're in the top 3. At number 3, I've got the Soul of Cinder. The Soul of Cinder is not a hard boss compared to Dark Eater Madeir. It definitely is challenging, but I do enjoy difficulty. The thing about Soul of Cinder is all the symbolism in relation to Gwyn. That's one of the things that really elevated him for me. He uses the Firelink Greatsword, which is just so cool, and then he's kind of an amalgamation of different player builds from Dark Souls 1 and, you know, obviously 2 and 3, but I feel like it's more so Dark Souls 1. When you fight the Soul Cinder, it kind of feels like you're fighting what Dark Souls 1 feels like. It's so nostalgic. And one of the coolest things about this boss fight, besides, you know, just the fit, the sword, just the aura, is that he can change stances to use different types of fighting. Like I said, it's kind of an amalgamation of all the builds used in Dark Souls. He could switch to a sorcerer stance, he could switch to kind of a cleric with a polearm, he could switch to a dexterity stance with pyromancy. It makes the boss fight so different from all the rest of them. Because usually they have a singular fighting style, and they have a lot of options in that fighting style, but it's still part of the same fighting style. Soul of Cinder is always switching it up. And then we get to the second phase. Like I said in the last video, when you hear the music of the second phase and you get comboed like I did, it's just absolutely incredible. The Soul of Cinder was definitely a perfect final boss to end the series. And the sword that he wields in phase 2 kind of widens out to look a lot more like Gwyn's sword, and that's so cool. I wish we could use that on our characters after you beat them. Like, you get 2 different options or 3 different options at soul transposition. I think the only bad thing about this boss is that when you transpose its soul and you get the Firelink Greatsword, it doesn't change stances. But anyway, Soul of Cinder itself is an incredible boss fight. Sure, the sword is a little bit disappointing when you get it yourself, but we're talking about the boss fight here, and the boss fight is incredible. We're moving to the top 2 spots. It's between 2 bosses. Now, before I say anything, I think these last 2 bosses are both in my top 3 bosses ever in video games that I've played. That means they're in my top 3, even being outside of the Dark Souls franchise. But at number 2, I'm gonna have to go with Slave Knight Gale. Slave Knight Gale fights in such an interesting way. I mean, you could really see that he's a hollow. And his design, the design choice is really cool. I like the red cape, but he looks broken. It looks like he's holding on to the tiniest sliver of his humanity in phase 1. He's just trying to keep going. He's trying to get that painted. And it's kind of sad at first, because To see him as a boss, it's really cool because he was an NPC earlier and I summoned him for the Demon Prince fight. So like the same dude that helped me take down the Demon Prince went insane and then we had to duke it out at the end of the world. One thing I've seen people talk about online is how they say it's two nobodies fighting at the end of the world for nothing. But at the same time, it's the two strongest people in history fighting at the end of the world for the most important thing, that being the Dark Soul. I feel like it really goes both ways, and that's just so interesting. But when we get to his second phase, and he stands up, he said, "Is this the blood of the Dark Soul?"
Is this the blood? The blood of the Dark Soul?
I feel like this is one of those times where they don't really recognize the Dark Soul itself until this point in the game. Like, Slave Knight Gale actually says, "Is this the Dark Soul?" Name drop. It's crazy. You proceed to have one of the craziest fights in history. There's lightning coming down. You know, he's shooting red humanity kind of avatars everywhere. And his cape is a secondary attack, which I think is so cool. He's fighting with a broken sword that he's kept with him since the beginning. Slave Knight Gale has been around to see everything. He's seen it all. And the fact that it's a slave who became the strongest, that is just incredible. Slave Knight Gale is such a cool boss. And that's why I think he's the third best video game boss that I've ever faced. At number 1, my favorite boss in Dark Souls 3. If you watched my playthrough, you should already know it. The Nameless King. I fought the first phase, the King of Storms, with the Halberd. And then you see the Nameless King drop down. You know, the dragon's dead. He smashes the dragon's soul out. He kills it, right? He absorbs its power, kind of like Ornstein and Smo. Once you kill one of them in Dark Souls 1. And he absorbs its power. There's lightning, there's like storms everywhere. And it looks like he just horrified. For me, the Nameless King is the hardest boss in the entire game. I could beat Slave Knight Gale if I really, I could go into the game right now and probably beat Slave Knight Gale on my first or second try. Same with any of these bosses. The only one that I don't think I can do that with is the Nameless King, because I tried to do it and it took me 7 attempts or something like that. Even though I had already fought him once and I'd already, learned his attack patterns from a previous playthrough. He's a boss that you have to go out of your way to get to. You have to go to Archdragon Peak, and the build-up is just incredible. He's the lost son of Gwyn, and it's the only time in the series where we see true sunlight, besides Soul of Cinder maybe. I don't know, man. It's just something about the Nameless King. When we get to the actual boss fight mechanics of the Nameless King, that might be my favorite part. Yeah, the design is super cool, the weapon is super cool, the phase transition was super cool, everything about it was super cool. He kind of delays some attacks, and it really got me my first times, and it still gets me to this day, honestly. I've gotten better with it, and it teaches you how to be patient. You don't just spam roll to dodge an attack. And if you go too far away, he has ranged attacks. You gotta really be careful when you heal, and you always have to be focused in this fight. Not to mention, I think this is the only boss in the entire game where you can get 3 different items with soul transposition. I think the Nameless King is my favorite character in the entirety of Dark Souls. Although he's number 1 on this list, he is not my favorite video game boss of all time. He is number 2 on that list. If you want me to talk about my favorite video game boss of all time, then I don't know, leave a comment and I'll definitely be sure to talk about it. Because that villain, that boss that is my favorite fight of all time is Demise from Skyward Sword, Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. I'm not going to talk about him in this video, but if you want me to talk about him, leave a comment and maybe I will. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and let me know down below who's your favorite boss in Dark Souls 3.